So we know that resilient communities bounce back better when disaster hits. What characteristics make for a more resilient community?
Probably three that I think of right away. The first is planning. It's planning for those events. And followed by planning is sort of the preparation of how you are going to deliver services when these events happen. And whether it's a drought or flooding or a hurricane or a tornado, depending where you are in the United States, it's that preparation. And then at the end, it's about involving the people in the community and addressing the issue. So those community volunteers become really important at the end or in the middle of the event. We are only so large in terms of local government, and it's getting our citizens engaged to a point where when these events occur, they know what they should be doing, they know where the escape routes are, they know what type of emergency supplies they should have for themselves. So it's really those three things. It's that planning, preparation, and the people in our community that make the difference.
I would agree, and I would add, I think as communities we're thinking about infrastructure differently. So how do we build adaptable infrastructure that's going to be able to accommodate differences in environmental changes and things like that. And then also I think in every instance where I've looked at a community who's undergone environmental disasters or anything else, communication is the biggest issue. And making sure that every partner in the community, whether it's a utility, a hospital, a school, a neighborhood association, the city, understands their role and understands what everybody else's role is, so that we're leveraging the resources in the community and not duplicating efforts.
Okay, so how do you currently use GIS tools in your resilience efforts, and in what areas?
I think currently in Dubuque we're using GIS to map our own infrastructure so that we can be more proactive, so that we can look at things like streets and water mains and address the issues before they happen, before the water main breaks. But then also so that when we do get in those emergency situations, we can pull up a map or we can pull up the data and know exactly where we need to go into the community to react to the situation.
And when you talk about GIS and how it's being used to create resilient communities, what's interesting to me is that if you go back 20 years, the Government Finance Officers Association talked about the need for all cities and counties to reference the utility infrastructure they had and actually put it on their books so that they knew what that liability was. And I think what that forced all of us to do about 20 years ago is to start trying to map what our utility infrastructure looked like, what its condition was, what its long-term forecast was, and how were we going to replace it. So I think it's an example of where one profession kind of picked up the ball and said, you know, we have all of these things that we don't see. Water, sanitary sewer lines, electric utilities, natural gas, stormwater, combined sanitary and stormwater systems. But how are we going to pay for it in the next generation? And if we continue to grow, how do we pay for it as we grow the system? And how do we establish the rates? And so I think it's kind of funny for me to see that it was actually finance officers that first sort of identified it, and then it kind of got picked up by public works directors, and now you see GIS as a key component of any community in terms of planning their next 5, 10, 15, or 20 years. You have to have a very robust and very complete GIS system that assesses for you all of the conditions that you have in terms of infrastructure, streets, sidewalks, all of the utilities, because it's how you pay for that going forward that's going to be really important for many communities.
And I think, I think it started with finance and then it was the public utilities, and for us we're looking at now kind of another layer of infrastructure which we've never thought about mapping before, but it's the social infrastructure of a community. So if you have minority populations, how are you going to communicate with them in an emergency? Or are your churches the social infrastructure that's going to help you communicate with the public? And it's taking that concept of infrastructure to a whole nother level and figuring out how you can use mapping to your benefit when you're looking at that new idea.
What you describe is sort of that social infrastructure, and you hear people in the last 10 years talk about green infrastructure and then hard infrastructure. And it's really that social infrastructure, what you brought up, which I found funny that it took 9 people before we started talking about the people that make up the community as being an important thing that we need to be able to map and understand and include in all of these discussions. And it's kind of funny because all city managers kind of start in the same place. You know, they're trying to think how to balance their budget, how much can they spend on capital, how much can they spend on people.
What are you most excited about being at this event today? Are there any things that you're particularly looking forward to?
You know, I'm really excited working with our staff. I see a culture shift in our organization where people are no longer saying, I work for the engineering department. They're saying, I work for the city of Dubuque. And I think that's gone back and forth. It's a pendulum. But as they're saying that, they're trying to figure out how what they do in engineering impacts water or impacts human rights, and really look at how we can better serve the citizens as a whole organization. And I think using GIS tools and using mapping is a great opportunity for us to figure out how that's going to happen. So I'm hoping to be able to learn some things that I can take back and help our staff do that better.
I think it's always great when you have the opportunity to meet with a number of different people from all across the United States. We have Florida, we have the Northeast with New Jersey and Boston, we have the Midwest with Dubuque, we have California with Sacramento and Redlands, Colorado in a mountain community that's in a resort area. And so you get a lot of different perspectives about what's going on in those places and sort of how they use information. And it's that collaboration that I think ICMA is really good at in terms of putting these small groups and webinars and people together so that you can start sharing those ideas. And that's really that cross-pollination of ideas that makes for strong communities in the United States. And it's sort of the story that I'm always telling people. There's this really great professional association that allows city managers from across the nation and world to work with each other and to listen to sort of what their challenges are and their opportunities, and then us being able to take some of those ideas and opportunities and actually experiment with them in our own hometowns.